It is 1:35 in the morning on October 27, 1942. The location is the black water north of the Santa Cruz Islands. The subject is the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, designation CV-8. She is listing heavily. She is burning, but she is defiantly refusing to die. What happens in the next few minutes is a masterclass in naval architecture fighting against the inevitable physics of destruction. This is not a tragedy, it is an engineering anomaly. Most ships succumb to a specific threshold of damage where the intake of water exceeds the reserve buoyancy and the vessel surrenders to gravity. Hornet had passed that threshold hours ago, yet she remained stubborn and afloat. The order had been given to scuttle her. This is one of the hardest commands a naval officer can issue, but the strategic reality left no choice. The American fleet was retreating, and they could not leave a capital ship to be captured by the advancing Imperial Japanese Navy. 2 American destroyers were tasked with the execution. They approached the burning carrier and unleashed a barrage of ordnance that should have vaporized a smaller vessel. They fired 9 torpedoes into her hull. They pumped 400 rounds of 5-inch shells into her waterline. The steel plating was shredded. The internal compartments were compromised. By all the laws of displacement and hydrodynamics, the carrier should have cracked open and slid beneath the surface immediately. She did not. The watertight integrity of the Yorktown-class hull proved to be stronger than the ordnance designed to defeat it. She became a zombie ship, a burning hulk, that simply would not leave the surface. The American destroyers ran out of time and were forced to withdraw, leaving the carrier adrift and refusing to sink. It required the arrival of the enemy to finish the job. Japanese destroyers arrived on the scene and fired 4 24-inch long lance torpedoes. These weapons carried a significantly heavier warhead than their American counterparts. The massive overpressure from these 4 impacts finally broke the structural spine of the ship. She groaned, rolled, and began her final descent stern first. When a ship of this magnitude sinks, she does not just disappear. She undergoes a violent transformation. As she slipped beneath the surface, the fires were extinguished by the rushing Pacific Ocean, but the internal violence was just beginning. Bulkheads collapsed under the pressure, trapped air pockets imploded with the force of bombs. The ship began a freefall that would take her miles down into the crushing dark. But even in this chaos, the ship preserved specific moments of her final fight in a way that seems almost impossible. When modern researchers eventually found the wreck, they discovered evidence of this chaotic timeline frozen in steel. One of the most chilling details is found on a 5-inch gun mount. The gun is not stowed. It is not locked down for travel. It is in the middle of a firing cycle. There is a projectile still resting in the fuse setter mechanism. This is a mechanical ghost. It tells us that a sailor was in the process of setting the fuse on that shell, preparing to fire at the attacking aircraft when the order to abandon ship came. The sailor left. The ship sank. But the machine held onto that shell. It held it through the fires. It held it through the capsizing. It held it through the violent impact with the bottom. That single shell in the fuse setter is a testament to the discipline of the crew. They fought until the very last second when the physics of the situation made survival impossible. The Hornet did not sink because she was weak. She sank because the mathematics of high explosives finally overwhelmed the engineering of her hull. She fell through the water column for nearly 20 minutes. She left the surface war and entered a new domain, a domain where the pressure is over 8,000 pounds per square inch, a domain of silence and total darkness. The surface battle was over. The survivors were being pulled from the water or retreating to the southeast. But the hull of the Hornet was traveling to a place where no light had ever reached. She was headed for a resting place 17,500 feet down. The question for history was not how she fought. We knew that. The question was where exactly she landed and what remained of her after such a violent execution. The ocean floor is a vast and featureless plain, and finding a specific hull in that darkness is harder than finding a satellite in orbit. 17,500 feet. That is the number that defines the grave of the USS Hornet. To understand the scale of this depth, you must visualize the geography of the world above the water. If you took Mount Rainier and inverted it into the ocean, the peak would still be thousands of feet above the deck of the carrier. At this depth, the ocean is not water in the way we understand it. It is a crushing fluid vice. The pressure is approximately 7,800 pounds per square inch. That is the equivalent of having a full-sized pickup truck balanced on every single square inch of the hull. This is the deep hostile. It is a region of the planet that is as alien to human life as the surface of the moon. When the Hornet finally reached this depth after her long freefall, she did not land gently. A warship displacing 25,000 tons carries immense kinetic energy even when sinking. She slammed into the seabed with enough force to plow a massive trench into the sediment. The impact was violent. The sonar imagery reveals that the hull slid for a significant distance before coming to a halt. This sliding action acted like a bulldozer pushing waves of heavy silt and mud up against the sides of the ship. In some sections, the mud is piled so high that it buries the hull all the way up to the hangar deck level. This deep burial hides much of the torpedo damage that sent her to the bottom. The wounds that killed her are now bandaged in 50 feet of sludge. However, this hostile environment is also a preservative. The deep ocean is cold, it is near freezing, it is completely dark, and crucially, it is very low in oxygen. These are the perfect conditions for arresting the chemical process of corrosion. Rust requires oxygen to eat steel. In the shallow, warm waters of Truck Lagoon or Iron Bottom Sound, wrecks decay rapidly. They become coral reefs and slowly dissolve. But at 17,500 feet, the clock stops. The Hornet exists in a suspended state of animation. This preservation reveals itself in startling color. When the lights of the underwater robots swept across the hull, they revealed something that shocked the researchers. The paint was still there. Not just flakes of paint, but distinct, recognizable camouflage patterns. The Hornet was painted in a scheme known as Measure 12. This consisted of a sea blue system designed to break up the silhouette of the ship against the horizon. After 77 years of immersion, that blue pigment is still visible on the gun tubs and the island superstructure. You can see the sharp lines where the dark blue transitions to the light gray. It is a surreal sight. It looks less like a shipwreck and more like a museum model that someone dropped into a deep pool. The preservation extends to the smaller details as well. The number 8 painted on the island is still legible. The tactical markings are clear. This creates a psychological dissonance for the viewer. Your brain knows that this steel has been underwater for nearly a century. You know it has been subjected to pressure that would crush a submarine like a soda can. Yet the visual evidence suggests the ship could have sunk yesterday. The deep, hostile environment has protected the Hornet from the biological decay that consumes ships in shallower water. There are no wood-boring worms here. There is no aggressive coral growth. There is only the silence and the cold and the mud. But the sonar scans that revealed this beautiful preservation also revealed a massive structural trauma. As the technicians analyzed the acoustic data returned from the bottom, they noticed a discrepancy in the dimensions. The main hull was sitting upright and proud on the bottom, but it was too short. The blueprints for a Yorktown-class carrier dictate a length of 825 feet. The sonar return measured significantly less. The data was undeniable. The ship was not intact. Somewhere in the darkness of the descent or the violence of the impact, the structural integrity of the hull had failed in a catastrophic way. The stern was missing. The fog of war is not merely a metaphor for confusion in decision-making, it is a literal degradation of data. When the Hornet was dying, she was surrounded by a fleet of American destroyers and cruisers. In the archives, there are deck logs from 9 different warships that attempted to track her position. In theory, this should provide a perfect triangulation of where she went down. In reality, it produced a map of chaos. No 2 ships agreed on the exact coordinates. The smoke, the darkness, and the desperate maneuvering of combat meant that the navigational fixes were estimates at best. When a ship drifts while burning and sinking, she becomes a ghost target. She moves with the current and the wind, and by the time she slips under, she might be miles away from where the last observer recorded her. This was the challenge facing the research vessel Petrel in January 2019. The team was looking for a needle in a haystack that covered hundreds of square miles of the South Pacific. Deep sea exploration is usually a game of patience and failure. You mow the lawn with sonar. You go back and forth in tedious grid patterns for weeks, hoping to see a shadow on the waterfall display. You expect to find nothing for days. You expect equipment failures. You expect the ocean to hide its secrets. But the search for the Hornet defied the laws of probability. The team deployed their autonomous underwater vehicle to scan the most likely area based on a new analysis of those contradictory logs. In a result that borders on the impossible, the robot located the target on its very first dive mission. The sonar sensors pinged a massive metallic object resting on the sediment. It was a hit on the first shot. This is the deep sea equivalent of sinking a hole in one on a golf course you have never played before in the dark. Once the sonar target was acquired, the operation shifted from search to identification. The team deployed the remotely operated vehicle. This is a robot tethered to the surface, shipped by miles of fiber optic cable. It brings high-definition cameras and heavy LED lights into the abyss. As the vehicle descended, the darkness gave way to the pale structures of the carrier. The digital resurrection began. The video feed transmitted to the surface confirmed the identity of the wreck beyond any doubt. The designation number 8 was visible on the island, but it was the smaller details that told the true story of her final hours. As the camera glided over the gun galleries, it focused on a single 20mm anti-aircraft mount. These guns were the last line of defense against the Japanese dive bombers. The weapon is still bolted to its mount, but the barrel is violently bent. It is twisted into a shape that steel should not naturally take. This is not the result of water pressure. Pressure squeezes from all sides equally. This damage is directional. It suggests a physical impact of tremendous force. It could be the result of a bomb blast nearby, or perhaps the gun was struck by falling debris as the ship listed and rolled. That bent barrel serves as a forensic clue. It freezes the violence of the surface battle in a static sculpture. It reminds us that before this ship was a quiet wreck, it was a screaming industrial platform of war. The gunners strapped into that mount were firing until the heat of the barrel blistered the paint. The bend in the steel is a permanent record of the trauma the ship sustained before she ever hit the water. It is a scar that the ocean could not heal. The drone continued its survey, mapping the flight deck and the island. The images were crisp and clear, transmitted instantly to screens miles above. But as the map of the wreck site came together, the anomaly detected by the initial sonar sweep became a confirmed fact. The digital twin of the ship was incomplete. The measurements verified what the acoustic shadows had suggested. The ship had not arrived on the bottom in one piece. The structural spine of the carrier had snapped. The digital reconstruction showed a debris field that trailed away from the main hull, leading to a second massive piece of wreckage lying alone in the dark, 150 feet. That is the length of the ghost limb missing from the body of the USS Hornet. When the researchers measured the main hull on the bottom, they found it was significantly shorter than the 825 feet specified in the naval architectural drawings. The stern section housing the steering gear and the propellers had been violently amputated. This was likely the result of the structural trauma caused by the 4 Japanese long-lance torpedoes that delivered the final kill. These weapons carried nearly 1,000 pounds of explosive each. They hammered the structural girders of the ship until the steel lost its tensile strength. At some point during the sinking, either due to the hydrodynamic drag of the freefall or the sheer force of the impact with the bottom, the stern simply snapped off. The result is a debris field that separates the main hull from the tail section. This area is a chaotic field of twisted plating and shattered machinery. It is the industrial autopsy of a 25,000-ton vessel. The steel plating here is torn and folded back like wet cardboard, demonstrating the immense forces involved in the breakup. The signal bridge also sheared off and lies isolated in the darkness, a lonely tower of command that no longer commands anything. But amidst this landscape of megaton violence, the high-definition cameras picked up an object that defies the logic of the destruction. Resting in the sediment of the debris field is a simple wash kit. Lying next to it, partially buried in the silt, is a toothbrush. It is a mundane object. It is made of plastic and bristles. It has no structural strength. It has no armor plating. By all rights, the violent forces that snapped solid steel beams and twisted propeller shafts should have pulverized this fragile personal item. Yet there it sits perfectly preserved in the mud. It looks as though it could have been dropped there this morning. This juxtaposition creates a jarring sense of scale. On one hand, you have the massive, broken stern of a capital ship, a failure of heavy engineering under extreme load. On the other hand, you have a sailor's toothbrush surviving the same event without a scratch. It is a reminder that the physics of a shipwreck are selective. The shockwave that tears a bulkhead might leave a small light object completely undisturbed, floating gently to the bottom in the wake of the destruction. That toothbrush is a human anchor in a sea of industrial wreckage. It forces the observer to remember that this steel skeleton was a home to over 2,000 men. The discovery of the stern section solved the mathematical mystery of the hull length. The ship is in two major pieces. But while the stern is a scene of chaotic breakage, the main hull holds a different kind of secret. As the remotely operated vehicle moved away from the debris field and ascended towards the hangar deck of the main wreck, the narrative changed. The exterior of the ship is a testament to the violence of war and the cruelty of the ocean floor. But the interior spaces tell a different story. The hangar deck of an aircraft carrier is a massive, open cavern designed to store and service planes. It is usually a cluttered, busy space. As the cameras peered into the darkness of the hangar, they did not find a twisted wreck. They did not find a collapsed ceiling or a debris field of crushed aircraft. They found a space that looked eerily organized. The hangar deck of the Hornet is not a crime scene, it is a parking garage. And sitting there in the middle of the darkness, waiting for a driver who will never return, is a vehicle that has become the most famous artifact of the entire expedition. Gravity is usually the enemy of order in a shipwreck. As a vessel lists 70 degrees and plunges into the abyss, unbolted equipment becomes a projectile. Toolboxes, spare parts, and vehicles are typically smashed against the bulkheads or thrown into a chaotic pile in the corner. By all logical models, the hangar deck of the Hornet should be a scrapyard of overturned machinery. But the lights of the underwater robot reveal a scene that defies this expectation. Resting in the center of the hangar deck is an International Harvester aircraft tug. It is not overturned, it is not crushed, it is sitting perfectly upright on its four wheels. To the observer, it appears as though the driver simply engaged the parking brake, stepped off for a coffee, and never returned. The level of preservation is so high that it crosses the line into the uncanny. The tires on the tractor appear to be fully inflated. Under the crushing weight of over 5,000 meters of water, air pockets usually collapse instantly. Yet these tires hold their shape, suggesting they are likely solid rubber or have perfectly equalized with the ambient pressure. The paint on the hood is a vibrant yellow-orange, standing out starkly against the gloom of the hangar. But the most striking detail is the lettering. The words International Harvester are stenciled in white on the side of the engine cowling. The letters are crisp. They are not faded. You can read them as clearly as if the machine were sitting on a showroom floor in Illinois in the 1940s. This tractor is a time machine. It anchors the viewer to the reality of the daily operations of the ship. Before the fire and the torpedoes, this was a workplace. Men drove this tractor to position the Wildcat fighters and Dauntless dive bombers for the next strike. The chain used for towing aircraft is still draped casually over the front hitch, frozen in a curve that gravity has not disturbed for 77 years. As the camera moves away from the mechanical perfection of the tractor, it finds something far more fragile. In a nearby bulkhead door, a coat is caught in the latch. It is a heavy wool coat, likely left behind in the rush to abandon ship. The metal door is rusted and the paint is peeling, but the fabric of the coat looks strangely pristine. The currents at this depth are negligible, so the coat hangs motionless. It has not rotted away. It has not been eaten. This image strikes a different chord than the guns or the tractor. A tractor is a machine of war and industry. A coat is a personal possession. It belongs to a specific sailor. It has pockets that might still hold a pack of cigarettes or a letter from home. Seeing it trapped in the door creates a visceral narrative of the final moments. The order to abandon ship was given. The sailor moved to the door. He squeezed through the opening as the ship began to list. The coat snagged. He did not stop to free it. He left it there, a final marker of his exit from the dying ship. These artifacts transform the wreck from a geological feature into a museum. The hangar deck is a sealed bottle protecting the atmosphere of 1942 from the ravages of time. It is a quiet, dustless tomb where the equipment is ready for a shift that will never begin. But for the researchers watching the monitors, this was an archaeological discovery. For one man watching the feed from his home in the United States, it was not history. It was a return to his youth. He knew that hangar, he knew that gun, and he had been waiting a lifetime to see them again. 17,500 feet of water creates a silence that lasts for 77 years. For nearly 8 decades, the families of the 140 men lost aboard the Hornet had only a date on a calendar to mark their loss. The ship was gone. The ocean had swallowed it whole. But technology has a way of collapsing time. When the research vessel Petrel beamed the images of the wreck back to the surface, they did not just go to a hard drive. They went to a living room in California where a 95-year-old man was watching. Richard Nowatzki was a fresh recruit when he boarded the Hornet in 1942. He fought on the deck during the Battle of Santa Cruz. He abandoned ship when the order was given, sliding down a line into the oil-slicked water. For the rest of his life, the ship existed only in his memory. But in January 2019, he was placed in front of a screen and shown the live feed from the bottom of the Solomon Sea. He watched as the camera panned over a 5-inch gun mount on the fantail. He did not just recognize the class of weapon, he recognized the specific gun. It was his battle station. He pointed to the screen and identified where he stood while Japanese dive bombers screamed down at them. The emotional distance of history vanished. He was back on the deck. And with the dark humor that defines the veteran sailor, he cracked a smile. He told the interviewers that if the robot could find his locker, they could keep the $40 he had left inside it. That joke bridges the gap between the living and the dead. It reminds us that the Hornet is not just a collection of steel plates and high explosives. It is a place where men lived and worked and saved their pay. The $40 is likely still there, rotting away inside a steel box buried in the mud alongside that pristine International Harvester tractor. The preservation of the ship preserves the humanity of the crew. The discovery of the Hornet brings a sense of closure, but it also brings a responsibility. The exact coordinates of the wreck have never been released to the public. The team that found her understood that a ship in this condition is a target. In shallower waters, wrecks are routinely plundered by illegal scrappers who blow them apart to steal the low background steel and copper. But the Hornet is protected by her depth. She lies far beyond the reach of casual looters. By keeping her location a secret, the researchers have ensured that she remains a sanctuary. She will not be raised. There will be no recovery of the $40 or the tractor or the coat in the door. The physics of the deep ocean have claimed her. She will remain in the dark, listing slightly to port, drifting slowly through geological time. The bent guns will continue to point at a surface they can no longer see. The anchor chain will hang forever in the void. The USS Hornet began her life as a weapon of war. She ended it as a casualty. But today she serves a new purpose. She is a monument to the resilience of American naval engineering and the courage of the men who stood their ground when the sky was falling. The ocean has taken her, but thanks to this mission, history has reclaimed her. She is no longer lost. She is just on eternal patrol deep in the silence where the only enemy is the pressure, and the only visitor is the memory of those who served.